Moderator tonight is Ed Glassman, who's the executive director of this, SANS Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership. And we're just so thrilled to have him leading this discussion. We have three great panelists. George Calais is a research director at The Block, a community that caters to enthusiasts of blockchain and crypto assets. He was previously in marketing at financial services firms and an analyst at a private equity firm. And most importantly, he graduated from SCH/CHA in 2014. Amit Gandhi is a professor of economics at Wharton, as well as vice president at Airbnb, and formerly the chief economist for the Microsoft Cloud. His work focuses on using data to improve decisions in the tech sector, and he is also the proud father of three fantastic SCH students, including twins, which I'm a twin parent, so I love that. Alexa Lombardo is the founder of Atomic 8, a marketing and design studio that focuses on building future-proof brands that navigate the world of Web3, blockchain, and NFTs. Alexa's large client list includes everything from Victoria Beckham to Estee Lauder. Alexa graduated from Springside in 2008, and I just learned was the founder of the Model UN Club at school, which is still going strong. So that's our group, and Ed, I'll hand it to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Steve. George, Alexa, Amit, it's really wonderful to have you here tonight. I know we have a record number of attendees for one of these virtual events, and I can imagine why. This is such an emerging and exciting field. I know a number of the people who have joined us tonight are students, and a lot of them want to get involved in this industry. So we have a wide variety of questions. Let's dive right in. I think the best way to get started is just to have each of the three of you share your journey with this industry. How did you wind up where you are today, and how does your work kind of intersect with blockchain and cryptocurrencies and NFTs? George, would you like to start us off?
Sure. And thanks for that introduction. I'm definitely really excited to be here because, when I first got involved with the space was actually when I was a student, not at SCH, but in college, around 2016, when the Ethereum network was live, and there were kind of the first applications built on it. And I just kind of thought, oh, this is really cool that actual, economic value is being transacted through these networks. There's something there. So after college, I ended up working for a company that consulted and built technology specifically for governments and banks that were exploring crypto. And then most recently, about 6 months ago, I moved over to The Block, which you mentioned is just a collective of journalists, researchers, and data scientists who are focused specifically on crypto and digital assets. So I lead our professional services team there, which mainly deals with companies looking to expand into crypto, or investors looking to allocate, figuring out how to strategize around what sectors or companies to look at, and then doing more like deal level diligence. So excited to be here. Wonderful, thank you.
Amit, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah. So I am an economist, as Katie mentioned, and I've been working really at the intersection of data, technology, and economics for the better part of the last 25 years. So I'm clearly the oldest by a long shot here. For me, this whole space is fascinating just because it's literally the intersection of data, technology, and economics that really come together in blockchain and crypto. And so I've been primarily in the academic world. I got my PhD at the University of Chicago. I've taught around a few schools. I've lately at the Wharton School of Business. But I did, as I saw technology really starting to take the lead on applications of data, jumped into the corporate sector as well, and has spent some time at Microsoft and now at Airbnb. And so I'm not a direct producer of crypto and NFTs, but I'm a very interested consumer and still a learner of the space. And so excited to be here.
Great, thank you. And Alexa?
Yeah, my journey was probably the most sort of winding to get here. I started my career in the on the corporate strategy team at the Estee Lauder companies. So our group was really looking at sort of what is the future of beauty, how do we define omni-channel, what's the future of retail. So there was always sort of a lens of technology that I was looking at. Everything that we were doing, I was looking at it through that lens. And after kind of being in corporate, I went on to be more in a brand management function for several Estee Lauder brands as well, and then at Unilever. And then I started independently consulting with brand founders to really do everything from concept all the way through to go to market. And then I started my studio after a couple of years of doing that. And the studio is really in more of the CPG, food, beauty space. But again, really looking at like what's new and next. And so a lot of the companies that we were working with did have a technology component, and just kind of kept getting further and further into tech. And then it wasn't until around this year's NFT NYC that the city was just really buzzing with energy around crypto, around NFTs. And I knew about them just because of, working in the technology space, and also just working with consumer brands, working with major brands that were attuned to this, and just kind of, my friends who had told me about it. And it was, that event that really, was the catalyst for my diving deep, off into the deep end. And, have since, started working on everything, from an NFT projects and how to bring them to market, through launching a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, to working with, various up and coming DeFi companies to give them more consumer friendly branding. So really we do everything from, branding and launching, as well as kind of incubation of ideas that are related to Web3, crypto, DeFi, blockchain, etc. But it's all relatively new for us, and I think no one. It's we were joking earlier that it's no one is an expert because it changes day by day. So we're all in a collective learning journey. So I'm excited to be here, with you guys today, and continuing on that journey.
It's fascinating. Thank you all. It's particularly interesting to me, and I'm sure we'll get into this, Alexa, that, when you think about these industries, you think about kind of future forward, these kind of startup brands, these emerging industries, but you're talking about these legacy brands like Estee Lauder, and even they recognize, the direction that a lot of these industries are going. I think that our audience and myself would benefit a lot if we just started off with some basic definitions: blockchain, cryptocurrencies, NFTs. What are they at a basic level? How are they connected? George, do you think you could kick us off with some of that, and then we can all pepper in?
Sure. So I guess just to start at the top, blockchains are simply just groups of computers that collectively agree on a set of shared facts. So Bitcoin, spelled with a capital B, is a computer network and an example of a blockchain, and actually the first blockchain. The shared facts that the Bitcoin blockchain works towards agreement to is how much Bitcoin, and that's the currency. I know it's a little confusing, spelled with a lowercase b. Each computer has the ability to send to another computer. So computers on the Bitcoin blockchain can send and receive Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, and pay their transaction fees in Bitcoin. So Ethereum is another example of a blockchain. Its native currency is called Ether. And that can be used to pay for transactions on the Ethereum blockchain. This is commonly referred to as gas fees. So if you ever kind of hear that term, that's a transaction fee you're using on Ethereum, or other kind of like smart contract platforms. What's interesting about Ethereum, and also some of its more recent competitors like Avalanche and Solana, is that it was built with the specific intent of handling a wider range of use cases than just payments and store of value like Bitcoin. And so it natively supports the issuance of new types of assets. So these include cryptocurrencies, tokens representing blockchain applications or real world assets, and of course now NFTs. So the core difference between a cryptocurrency and an NFT is this question of fungibility. So NFTs stand for non-fungible tokens. And fungibility is just like sort of a fancy way of saying uniqueness. So, if you think of cryptocurrencies, any cryptocurrency like Bitcoin is exchangeable with another Bitcoin. Similar to how $1 bill, anyone would exchange that with another dollar bill. They're exchangeable. This is not the case for NFTs. So NFTs are sets of assets that represent unique things. So think like digital art, access to, payouts, or, if you're an artist, some sort of digital royalties, plots of land in the metaverse, which I know Alexa is going to talk a little bit about. And just a lot of like unique types of instruments that one wouldn't necessarily exchange with another. Like think about a house. Each house has different market values, and people customize them in different ways. But what's really cool, and I guess the similarity between these things, is that both NFTs, tokens, cryptocurrencies, this whole world exists on blockchains, which are decentralized in nature and open source. So this is, in my mind, what's interesting about this is it's allowed, a really wide range of developers, application builders, even like game designers, just this whole like really rich ecosystem to build stuff on top of each other. And we're actually seeing like a lot of these worlds, we're going to talk about today, like sort of converge. So I think like we're at a really interesting inflection point here, with all of these different kind of categories of instruments and networks.
Great. Amit, Alexa, anything to add?
Let's quickly say one thing, and then not maybe less on the current state, but maybe just slightly historically, just the backstory to Bitcoin is absolutely fascinating. I mean, they're going to make a movie about it very soon, I'm sure. But Bitcoin was made, it was invented in 2009 by an anonymous individual, right? Someone with a pseudonym named Satoshi Nakamoto, right? So and what's wild about it is that it's a paper, and it's a paper that anyone can go out there and read. You can go download this paper, and it's a fascinating paper that solves an open question in economics and computer science of the day, which is, can a decentralized digital currency even exist? And it sounds like an impossibility, right? I mean, if I make a digital currency, Amit coin, and I send it to you, you can just copy the coin and spend it twice. And what stops, that's sort of known as the double spending problem. So if you think about this from a technology perspective, what was the real core innovation is how do you build something that solves this double spending problem? And there was 3 parts to it that I think are worth just everyone realizing. One is the blockchain itself, which is nothing more than a ledger. It's a system of debits and credits, which is double entry bookkeeping, which goes back to the 14th century, so that's not particularly technological. There's the notion of decentralizing these ledgers on different nodes on a system or miners. But then I think the kicker is this idea, and what George talked about before, is creating a single source of truth from all these decentralized ledgers, right? So how do you stop someone from creating an alternative reality where they didn't spend this money, right? This is sort of, how would you stop the sort of a fork in the road? And that's really this protocol, and that's where the crypto comes in. That's where the cryptography, there's game theory. It's a very rich set of ideas. And yeah, I mean, with that, history is written, and that was the first, I think, crypto. There's now 10,000 cryptos out there on different blockchains that have different protocols, and so it's become a very fascinating space just from a history perspective.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was just going to jump in, and a term that I use quite frequently is Web3, which is sort of, you've had Web 1.0, then you've had the social web, Web 2.0, which is a little bit more interactive, and now Web 3 is more of a decentralized internet. So building off of the same principles of blockchain and decentralized finance, it's run on apps, on tools that are powered by blockchain, and it really allows users to participate and contribute, and their data is their own, and so they're able to monetize their own data, and therefore they are the owners of this new internet. It's not Facebook owning your data. It is you, and using that data for your own benefit as well as the greater good. And so I think it's a real paradigm shift in terms of how we as users are really in control, and we are the co-creators of this future internet. And I think that's an area that I'm really fascinated by, and I think it's really going to shape how we as individuals engage with other companies, other brands, as well as each other. And so I think that whether or not you are into the crypto side of things or the blockchain side of things, Web3 is something that will impact us all, universally.
Great. And the other, hot topic and term in this Web 3.0 world is the Metaverse. One of the largest companies in the world changing their name to Meta. Alexa, since you kind of think about that space for major brands, maybe you can walk us through.
Sure. It's really interesting because I think we've all probably experienced the metaverse without even realizing it. For me, the earliest experience of the metaverse was playing The Sims. So if you've ever played that game, that going into the metaverse today, if you guys poke around on the Sandbox or in Decentralized, it is a lower quality version of The Sims. It's really, really interesting. But basically, it's building off of that same idea. And the term is still, I think, being defined, right? Like it's still a work in progress. But at this point in time, it's kind of a series of these connected virtual worlds. Like it's, and there are a lot of, debates out there between an open and a closed metaverse. And I think that's why Facebook is getting a lot of heat for wanting to build Meta, the metaverse, and it's a closed metaverse. And I think that's just in complete opposition to the values upon which Web3 is built, and that crypto and decentralized finance are built as well. But with an open metaverse, there are these series of worlds within this world that can be accessed using your crypto wallet, which is another thing that we can get further into. And then rather than kind of being yourself in the metaverse, you can have avatars, and you can have one avatar, you can have multiple avatars. At this point, there are a lot of different groups who are trying to connect these different worlds so that you can go across them with the same avatar, as well as the same kind of tools in your wallet. So there's a place for NFTs in the metaverse to serve a utility purpose. But right now it's all very early stages. But people are there are actual real estate companies that are buying lots and lots of land in the metaverse. It's not something hypothetical. It's just a matter of when because there's a Snoop Dogg has a lot of land in the metaverse. That's why the Sandbox has such a high valuation, and people are rushing to get their plots next to Snoop Dogg. It's really, really fascinating. But I think really like thinking about those games that you might have played as a kid, and those avatars that you had, it's not too different from that. It's just those blockchain, those decentralized finance principles that make it different. And a concept that I think is, not to go too far into this, is that's really interesting, is that you used to play those games for fun, and now you can actually play these games and you can earn real money. And there's a play to earn component of a lot of what's happening in the metaverse. That's people can actually have a very lucrative career just out of being a participant in this space.
That's a great definition. And just one quick thing to add, 2 points I thought were really interesting is, one, like in a lot of ways we already live in the metaverse. You mentioned Sims. I'm sure some people are gonna like play Fortnite after this, or like I work with people that are based in Europe that I've never met, and I would call them friends, and maybe get on a Twitter Spaces with them, and everyone's Twitter avatar is an NFT that doesn't look like them. So it's kind of funny in many ways. The social element of it is already there. But kind of the other thing that's really interesting that you mentioned around these games and potentially making money, that's a big piece of it. But the other, interesting element is those game objects, actually owning them. rather than those just being line items on a game company's server that they can delete at will. And what's really funny is, I was talking a little bit about Ethereum earlier and how it's sort of this more general purpose blockchain platform. Its founder, Vitalik Buterin, it was a little while ago, he was being interviewed and someone said, "Why did you create Ethereum?" And his answer was, "I was playing World of Warcraft and they deleted the modifications to one of my weapons. And I had spent years, building my identity and, everything I do based on like all my strategies based on that." And he said he cried himself to sleep for multiple nights and then, put his hands on his keyboard and started typing up the Ethereum white paper. So, these ideas of sovereignty of both your identity, your, monetary assets, but also your like creative assets is very like deeply intertwined with sort of the whole ethos of blockchain, and I think it's perfectly kind of like encompassed by this term Alexa brought up, which is Web3.
Yeah, which I mean, it's all sort of tied at some level. I'm the old guy here, so I have to bring up a lot of the original thinking behind the internet itself. I mean, it's sort of these were sort of the original ideals to some extent behind which the internet was based, around sort of this decentralized, democratic, fairly libertarian philosophy. And it's just interesting. I mean, Web3 in many ways, it's new, but there's some old there too, and sort of bringing back some of the original value system behind which the internet was based.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I go to as many Web3 virtual events as I do in real life events. And I think, one of the interesting things is it's just sort of a play between the virtual and the in real life. And, there's a, you can have friends that you met them first on the internet, or you met them first online, or you met them first in the metaverse. And then you're bringing that experience into real life versus what it was before, which is you take your real life experiences online. So there's sort of this shift that's happening.
So there's a lot of exciting possibility in this Web 3.0 space, but there's also, some risk and some downside. Like, for example, investment in this space, right? The US dollar is backed by the full faith of the government. Cryptocurrencies, are they backed by any standards? Are they a viable and stable source of income? There's also this entire element of the environmental costs of mining some cryptocurrencies. Could we speak a little bit to the other side of the coin, some of the risks, some of the challenges in this space?
Sure. Yeah, I can chime in quickly because I guess I'll answer the first part of that question first around inherent volatility and referring to like the US dollar and is like the mental framework. I think really like what people are trying to grapple with is what actually like gives this stuff value. Why isn't this just like vaporware if anyone can create a cryptocurrency so easily on Ethereum? And why it's an interesting question is really as recent as the past like 2 years, cryptocurrencies and the broader set of digital tokens has just evolved in a way where that answer is not only different for so many different cryptocurrencies, but even just the frameworks for thinking about how to assess these things are going to be like completely, very different considering like what you're looking at. So I guess like starting at like the lowest level, Alexa mentioned DeFi. So, if we start at, what are people actually using this stuff for? One of the most common use cases is these like financial applications. And so, maybe it's a lending market or, a decentralized exchange that allows you to swap assets. These protocols are issuing their own cryptocurrencies to users, and those cryptocurrencies can be used to vote on governance decisions. So if the protocol, remember these things are open source and governed by the community of token holders. So if, the decentralized exchange protocol, someone, offers a, advancement or wants to distribute fees in a different way, that's voted on by the token holders. Similarly, very often those token holders are actually paid real revenue from the fees on those applications. And so I think looking at the applications, it's actually a lot more like looking at stocks and, what am I owning? What does the dividend look like than a currency? Moving up the stack a little bit is, we talked about Ethereum a little bit. You have these layer 1 blockchain platforms. That's what these applications are built on. And those things all have their native cryptocurrencies. We mentioned ETH, Solana's is Sol, and AVAX for Avalanche. And these things are used to pay fees for people who are using the applications. So, as the applications become more popular, more people want to use these networks. And so there's demand for these tokens because that's what you're paying your gas in. But then you have Bitcoin. And I think that's sort of like the intended object usually for questions that involve comparisons to national currencies and central banks. And it's worth kind of like emphasizing that Bitcoin's value proposition is very different than any of those coins I just mentioned, which are all sort of aiming to be some sort of decentralized computer network or an application on that network. Bitcoin's entire purpose is to be, censorship resistant digital money. And so its precise goal is actually not being tied to a central bank or government. So we talked a little bit earlier about how, Bitcoin's both a currency and a network. So, naturally kind of this concept of censorship resistance really like manifests in two ways. The first being that Bitcoin, the currency, not being tied to the monetary policy of a central bank. And Amit talked about this a little bit. And to take it even a step further, many actually treat Bitcoin, the asset, as a hedge against central bank inflation. And then second, looking at Bitcoin, the network, it having a technical architecture that makes it resistant to government censorship. Similar to what we saw, in China this past June. And of course, there's stable coins that are aiming to have parity with the dollar, most of which with decent success by just kind of holding assets in a bank. And people use that for payment when they don't want to deal with the volatility of cryptocurrencies. So there definitely is kind of this sense that cryptocurrencies are great. People want to use them at the application layer and the protocol layer. People want to store their wealth in Bitcoin. But yeah, these things are volatile. Like you're probably going to want to have some stable coins, which are, blockchain-based tokens tied to the dollar to make payments, do other things. But it's really about kind of like balancing, one, what you're trying to kind of do on these networks with, what instrument you want to use.
Yeah, and the volatility it's interesting, just as George was talking, like the volatility and the mainstreaming are kind of chicken and egg problems, right? I mean, with the volatility is sort of preventing some of the mainstreaming, but part of the unsuredness, is this going to mainstream or not? Maybe the whole thing is a scam. It's sort of partly tying, going back to where markets get a little volatile. So, but that's sort of a classic problem, and these things take some time to resolve. But I think the point about one thing George said there is that the value, at the end of the day, it's all supply and demand. And so it's what's fascinating about a blockchain is that it turns digital files effectively into assets. And so now you create scarcity. And once you have scarcity, there's the potential for value, but it depends on where the demand and supply intersect. And economists like to say there's no accounting for taste. And, why is this stuff valuable? I don't know, but why is art valuable? Why is gold valuable? Like these are things that the math doesn't solve. It's really, what do humans value? And that, that becomes a sociological problem.
Right. I heard a very, one of the greatest comparisons that I heard was, in thinking about what is value attributed to within your community. And so, for example, in certain, nations in Africa, cell phone minutes are the most valuable tradable asset. And so it's the same principle. And so this is a new method of attributing value.
Interesting. It's about 7:30, so I think now we should move away from the kind of scheduled programming and toward the vast array of questions from the audience. We got a bunch in advance. There are more pouring in every minute. A number of these fall into the category of investment and getting things like help an investor who can see the fluctuations in the stock market understand NFTs. In simple terms, why is purchasing a cartoon character worth so much money? Is it purely speculative? And then I'm also getting some people saying, what are some tips on investing in these new phenomenon? So anything that you want to share around those questions would be great.
Yeah, I can take a first stab at the NFT thing, and I'll kind of tackle it from like a crypto native perspective, like inside, kind of looking out, and I'm sure Alexa kind of has a lot of really interesting thoughts about how like brands and like not necessarily like crypto native users are using these things, but I see it as like some of the earliest NFTs. The reason is actually like quite simple, which is you have, a lot of people, and this is like, somewhat of a crude explanation, but you have a lot of people who have, been in these spaces, been in digital spaces for a very long time, who've, accrued like monetary capital by being early investors in these networks, by, buying into, kind of the ethos of blockchain, and they're looking for ways to express themselves. And you can't really express yourself by saying, or, you kind of look like a jerk if you're saying, oh yeah, I hold, 1 million Ether, look at me. And so what's interesting about, sort of the earliest form of NFTs, and a lot of crypto, is going to start in sort of these, status-based speculative areas, and then grow into more, interesting and, real world use case kind of ways. But, I think the earliest and simplest use case for NFTs was these profile pictures, like CryptoPunks, Bored Apes. And if you look at these people who've been very active in crypto for the past, 5-6 years, many of them run anonymous Twitter accounts. Many of them, have more followers on Twitter than people that have probably been in their house in the past decade. And so if you think like, how is someone, and that's an extreme example, but I think all of us sort of have this sense now, especially like post-COVID, that a lot of our interactions are digital, and a lot of the way we signal to other people are digital. And so in a lot of ways, like a digital image that can be used as a profile picture, that can be used to signal access to a NFT only club, all these things that NFTs enable, people are attributing an increasingly amount of resources to kind of digital native stuff. And I think that's what NFTs capture really well, that cryptocurrencies on their own sometimes miss, because they lack that kind of social component.
Yeah, social capital is a source of value, right? And so it's harder to quantify, but it exists. And just to build on what George said, I think from an investment perspective, going back to the fact that these are assets, I mean, you should think about them like you think about any other asset. I mean, the same principles apply. And so if you want to be an investor in this space, I mean, think about, what is the value today? What is maybe the cash flow this can generate? And it's not that different in a sense, but it does require broadening one's horizons and sort of thought process to understand the value proposition. And the last thing I'll say is about, like, even in the early days of Web 1, going back to Web 1, people were buying up domain names and nobody, like, why would you do that? That's crazy. And it turns out, if you bought www.coke.com, you could be a millionaire very quickly. And so a lot of the same, like, this sounds crazy now, but so did domain names in 1996. And so there's a lot of like realizing that these spaces move very fast, and what doesn't make sense today makes a ton of sense in a couple of years.
Interesting. I have a question here, kind of from an educator perspective. How do you think students can begin to prepare to compete in this space, to work in this space? What skills do you think will be necessary going forward in these industries?
If any students want to get involved with me directly, I think one of the easiest ways to get in it is community. And in the same way that being a sort of social media manager, or being someone who is managing community in the early 2000s was, the gateway to sort of digital marketing. And this is kind of a gateway to a career in Web3. I think community as a currency is super important. It ties into a lot of what's going on with these NFT projects, but cultivating that as a skill, I think that's one way to get involved. And that can be anything from, creating community on existing social channels or joining some new communities in Web3. It doesn't necessarily need to be Web3, but it's a great way for students to get their foot in the door. I think it's less of a technical skill at the moment, but it's a way that you can kind of soak up a bunch of knowledge about all these different areas of Web3, which I think, we're defining things at a very, very high level, but there are so many sort of different segments of each of these sort of subsets that you can find the area that you're passionate about by just really getting involved in the communities. And then the other thing that I would say is, there is an application for any of the areas that you're kind of passionate about. If you're into art, music, if you're into economics, if you're into writing, there is a community out there for you, and there's a way to monetize that. So for example, there's a tool called Mirror, and you can actually get paid for your blog content, basically. Like that's the simplest way for me to describe that. And you actually receive tokens. Mirror's on the Ethereum blockchain, so you can actually exchange those for eventual Ether. So there's just a lot of different, there's something, whatever you're passionate about, there's some application in Web3, and I would just say sort of start there.
Great, thank you. I'm getting a couple of questions about using cryptocurrencies as a reliable means of payment. One is, how can we rely on these cryptocurrencies as a mean of payment when their values fluctuate so wildly? Another is, there seems to be mixed perspectives on whether crypto is reliable to purchase / use or not. What are the benefits and risks to using it? So we talked a little bit about it, the investment side of it, right? But could we talk a little bit about kind of the daily use of it and this notion of becoming kind of standard for payment?
Yeah, I can just add something quickly on the first, which is, I think an important framework for thinking at least about like early cryptocurrency is these are adversarial systems, meaning that they're designed to, withstand, attacks, and their use cases are usually tend to be in instances where you don't want or you can't trust a central intermediary. And so, when people talk about payments, it's usually, you hear a lot of people in the US talking about that. And it's like, why would I use Bitcoin when I can, I have Venmo, I can tap to pay on my phone. I can do all these things. Like I have a credit card that allows me to, even pay later. Like we have all this great stuff. Like why use crypto? And, at the end of the day, a lot of companies have tried doing pay with Bitcoin, never really works. And so because, all these companies want to cash out of Bitcoin into the dollar. And the underlying reason is people like the dollar. The US dollar is the international reserve currency. Foreign debt is denominated in dollars. It's been reliable so far. But that's not the case everywhere. And so I think thinking about cryptocurrency is something for payments and specifically Bitcoin. The people who are doing the most work there are primarily focusing on developing countries and or countries like Turkey, for example. Very recently, their currency blew up. And people don't want to necessarily hold their value in that currency if it's going to be devalued so quickly. And maybe they're willing to take that risk of crypto volatility versus a currency that they know their government is just printing money. And so I think Bitcoin is definitely being explored in those areas. And then also you have seen some work around stable coins being used for payments. But I still think that's mostly happening in Web3. If you want to pay someone on a blockchain application or in the metaverse, less so, buying a cup of coffee, at least today.
just a follow-up question to that, George, and we can all weigh in on this. Can the world really change to cryptocurrency given the amount of energy that it requires? We kind of gleaned over that energy question, environmental question a little earlier. Could we speak to that?
Yeah, I can talk very quickly about it because I'm really like not the expert, but the way I understand it is, the energy problem is specific to certain cryptocurrencies, and it is a function of the Amit was talking a little bit about how these networks like come to agreement. That's called their consensus process. And so Bitcoin and currently Ethereum use one called proof of work that relies on using a lot of energy to solve basically hard, math problems that allow them to, like win that slot in block production. So that all sounds like kind of weird. Where does energy come in? It just takes a lot of electricity to do that. The one thing I would note is if you look at a lot of the stuff, Alexa's talking about with the metaverse, DeFi, and all these applications, these are mainly built on Ethereum. I think they have like 90% market share of smart contract platforms, but also this growing number of Ethereum competitors. The long tail of Ethereum competitors do not use proof of work. They use a different consensus model that requires significantly less energy to the point where it's almost, I would say like trivial amount compared, at least in comparison to like other computer systems. And Ethereum itself is actually, they've been planning to move to proof of stake for as long as I can remember. But the actual upgrade, it's called the difficulty bomb, is scheduled to happen on a block that's going to happen in June this year. So even Ethereum and all of its apps are going to eventually move to proof of stake as well. So if you think about the networks where so much of this commerce is taking place, that will happen on more energy efficient rails. But Bitcoin has always been the most conservative community. They are never going to change to something else. This will always be, from the way you look at it, a problem. But I would also argue that many Bitcoiners actually see this a feature and not a bug of Bitcoin, just because if you think about their goal, it is to have the most censorship form of digital money. And kind of the hard truth is energy is kind of that scarce resource that is likely to be the most decentralized and hardest for, a government to clamp down on. So, I see Bitcoin never changing from that. If that, but at least people have the option to use that or not.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, it's
so much on that.
This proof of stake. We don't have enough time, I guess, to discuss and debate, but I'm fascinated by this proof of stake versus proof of work. I've heard there's different persuasions as to what one means versus the other, but I think with the Bitcoin does really have. I mean, there is a scaling problem. We should be clear. Like today, I think I read a stat: 110 terawatts of terawatt hours of energy are consumed in Bitcoin mining today. So that's the energy consumption of a small country. If Canada if they were to move from their currency to Bitcoin, the electricity consumption of Canada as a whole would go up 20x. So these are not particularly scalable phenomenon. But I do think, kind of even speaking to Bitcoin and without going to the proof of stake versus proof of work solution, I mean, some of this also just depends on the decarbonization of the grid more generally. I mean, the fact that Bitcoin is not sustainable is, so is electricity, cloud is not sustainable. We have many non-sustainable practices that, in some sense are all rolled into, the need to get to a net zero place with carbon emissions in society. So in some sense, the solution, insofar as there is one, is going to be rolled into a broader need to move on to renewables.
Right. We've spent a lot of time talking cryptocurrencies and blockchain, but not as much about metaverse. So let's spend a little time there. So Amit, Alexa, you both work with global brands. Could we talk a little bit about how large companies like Airbnb and Microsoft and Estee Lauder and Pepsi are kind of changing their strategies and their structures and looking to engage in these spaces?
Alexa, do you want to lead off?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can talk more on the sort of consumer brand side of things. I think that we've talked a lot about sort of what makes an NFT project, what is an NFT, but what makes an NFT project kind of, good are a few things. It's the size of the community and the community around that project, which can be measured by things like, members of their Discord community, followers on Twitter, the quality of the engagement, as well as sort of the scarcity factor, right? And this sort of the novelty factor as well of the item itself. And so I'm seeing a lot of brands try to hop on this NFT train with like a lack of authenticity and a lack of strategy. I mean, you see a lot of these projects. Some of the earlier projects, I get it. You're like, why am I paying this much for an image of an ape? I think there is, it's a status symbol of being sort of a first mover. It's a status symbol that you can afford it. It's a membership to this community where you are part of something that, Jay-Z is also a part of. So there's that. But then a lot of these other projects, there's a real, authenticity around either the quality of the art, the utility that the NFT affords. And so there's a purpose to these different projects. Some of them are giving revenue to nonprofits or charities. So there's a lot of different ways to make these projects meaningful. And I think what we unfortunately see is a lot of these brands that are actually just kind of trying to have some skin in the game, and they're missing out on that strategy, that authenticity, and the scarcity factor, and they're just churning stuff out. I think, Estee Lauder is a good example. Clinique launched an NFT. It's, the price of it was extremely low. It was just really to say that they did it. And it really went nowhere. And that's because, there wasn't that, that community engagement around the project. And so an example of a brand that I think is doing it well in sort of this bigger brand space is probably Budweiser. Actually, they've done a really good job with their NFTs, with creating art that is meaningful if you are a fan of Budweiser, the brand, but also there is sort of a utility function in that you get sort of these exclusive membership perks once you're part of that NFT community. So I definitely see it as more of a still like that status symbol for like brand loyalists. I think that's really important. Just sort of putting an NFT out there for the sake of it, that's not going to get you many wins. And there are more brands that I see at that big brand level that are doing that. And then there's the brands that are doing. We haven't really gotten to the topic of a DAO, which is sort of a decentralized autonomous organization, which you can actually launch your own sort of token and currency. And I'm not going to go too far into that, but it's this whole other area for brands to play in that uses the same principles of blockchain. And I think there's also something to be said about that around, again, cultivating that community. Because I think community is also a new currency for brands, and community that isn't just defined by this one way communication like it has been with Facebook and Instagram, but it's really the community is part of the creation process. And I think brands that really embrace that and leverage tools that embrace that, they're the ones who are ultimately going to win in the space.
Yeah. The second that, I mean, I think every company in the world feels some pressure at this point to be part of it in some fashion or another. And I think there is still a little bit of what everything Alexa mentioned, sort of wait and watch mindset as well. You don't want to dip your toe in the water and do something silly at the same time. So it is complex. I think there is a difference also between sort of the enterprise companies versus the consumer facing companies. I mean, when I was at Microsoft, they did try unsuccessfully to sort of create a blockchain product. But it wasn't clear, like, what's the use case? Like, what are you going to develop? And it just, it didn't go well. And IBM has struggled in this space. Google has just started. They actually just put a whole blockchain organization together. So, I mean, companies are trying. I mean, I'm at Airbnb now. Our CEO, Brian Chesky, just put out a tweet the other day asking for the most requested features that we should be building. Number one, unsurprisingly, to everything George just said, acceptance of cryptocurrency as payment. So I think the consumers want it. Brands are going to have to respond, but the question is how. And I think it's going to take a lot of knowledge, taste, and strategy to put it together.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'll add to that too is that there is sort of this way for there to be a link between digital goods and physical ones. And so one of the things that we're also exploring is there's not just waste that comes from, you know, from crypto and from mining crypto. There's a ton of waste out there that's just from good old industrial manufacturing. And so there is potential for some of these lower impact networks to be used to create digital goods in the place of physical goods, or to create some connection between them. And I think also brands that are looking at that, there may be a way to actually marry the two together and have there be a more robust product offering that spans the two and ultimately reduces waste, while still engaging your consumer base. Sorry.
A few more questions coming through from the audience. One is, what steps should NFT owners take to ensure a digital item will still open in 20 years when the technology supporting it has changed? If they can't open, do they become worthless, like floppy disks? Interesting.
I think that's a pretty interesting question when it comes to NFTs, because if you look at the architecture of a lot of them, you know, we can say so many good things about, you know, look, you actually own this NFT, you know, this, you hold the, you know, right to it in your crypto wallet. But actually, like, what is that NFT? It's more, you know, we pretty much all of them have some sort of image or media attached to them. It's not just a token address. And what does that actually link to? And very often it's actually just a pointer to like an HTTP site with like a image embedded in it. So there's like really nothing stopping the developer from switching that out. There are some protocols that offer like decentralized file storage that would allow that link to remain permanent. And so, you know, that can never be changed or tampered with. But people have sort of played around with this idea just to kind of emphasize the point that, look, you know, you're not necessarily like buying the picture, you're buying like a digital token, and that digital token points to something. So I think like definitely there's like more work on the infrastructure that needs to be done.
I know less other than to say, I do think that some of the eventually legal institutions will have to think about what some of these issues mean. Like if you try to bequeath an NFT and people don't have access to kind of the right to the claim. I mean, I think society is going to have to sort of catch up to some of the technology. And I think some of these things are just open pending issues that require resolution.
Yeah, also like that's such a good point. You know, if you steal someone's work and NFT it and then, you know, sell it to someone and they own it, you know, what are they actually owning? And it's actually a problem you see like a lot on the most popular NFT marketplace is OpenSea. And it's really funny. Alexa brought up Bored Apes. Bored Apes are now they're actually the most valuable like PFP NFT series. But what is sort of like famous about them is they sort of cater to a like newer audience in crypto, maybe one that's never like interacted with the blockchain before, and probably has like less lessons in you know, security and how to like keep their passwords safe and whatnot. And like all the time, you never see this with any other collection. For some reason, it's always the Bored Apes are getting stolen, and you know, people are trying to sell them. And it's actually a really interesting philosophical question, because OpenSea is a marketplace. They're not custodying your NFTs. They're almost more like a matchmaker. They're allowing you to meet with buyers and sellers. But OpenSea has started blacklisting crypto Bored Apes that are known to have been stolen. And people are kind of saying like, should they be able to do that? Like, you know, is it, or rather, you know, from a more practical perspective, is it right that OpenSea has 95% market share? You know, people are already a little annoyed with them because they haven't launched a token and they're governed purely by the company itself, rather than through community governance. The reason being they want to IPO soon, and that would be a regulatory concern. And what we've seen in the past 2 weeks is the emergence of totally decentralized NFT marketplaces that have just like blown up. So it's really like cool to see how like the market has responded to that.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of what you brought up are these questions, these ethical questions that I think, every innovative, any innovation ever, right, draws a lot of these same questions, right? We're still debating a lot of these when it comes to the internet in its current state. So I think, this isn't a reason to sort of say, I'm not going there, I'm not getting involved. These are things that will take time to work out. But certainly there are already people, and that's what's also interesting about this space. We're solving the problems much faster than we ever did before because the barriers to entry are a lot lower and there's just so much energy around the space. And so I think, that's what's also really compelling to me, is that, yes, we're creating some new problems, but we're solving them faster than ever before. And a lot of these issues I'm pretty confident we'll be working out, and soon launch, creating new issues for ourselves, but also, it's in progress already.
Right. I think that's a nice transition to what will probably be one of the wrap-up questions for tonight. If Web3 is based on everyone owning their own data without the need for a third party, then is it a threat to companies like Facebook and Google and these kind of like legacy Web 2.0 companies?
I mean, I guess yes. I mean, the simple answer would be the premise. Web 2. The way I think about Web 2 is that it was, Web 1 was about effectively exchanging information. Web 2 was about the applications, like building applications on the internet, and that's where all these classical, economic issues, economies of scale, data platforms started to emerge. Web3, and I still think it has to prove its hypothesis out, but it effectively intercedes with that business model. So there's certainly a risk, but then with any business risk, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world they'll try to adapt, and this will be kind of a new. And very interesting. I think the next 10 years are going to be very interesting in this sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're already starting to adapt. And I mean, when you look how Google dominates software, so much of what we're building on Web3, we're actually building it on Web2 right now. Every single DAO that and I keep using this term, and we should have defined it, but every project that I'm a part of, we're in Google Docs constantly. We're saving everything on Google Drive. The head of YouTube just moved to, I think he moved to Polygon, one of the biggest, another major network. So I think, we're seeing the influence of Web 2, and it's going to still be very pervasive. And can those companies adapt, or is there going to be a talent drain? Who knows? But they're definitely making moves to adapt. And I think it's all about the philosophy that they embrace, right? I think one of the biggest challenges for Facebook to stay relevant is something that I brought up earlier, which is they're trying to build a closed metaverse, which is inherently opposed to what everyone else is trying to do. And yes, they created Oculus, but Apple's about to launch their headset. Google's going to launch theirs. You don't even need a headset right now to get into the metaverse. Eventually, I saw that question come up. No, you don't need an Oculus. You can go to Decentraland.com, or I think it's .com. It might be .io, .xyz, whatever. Google Decentraland. You can get in there and walk around. It's not that impressive, but it's a great exercise. But it's more about, there is going to be innovation, and they're all going to be in competition with each other. And it's sort of like, I think if they can embrace the values and they can adapt to those, then they're at risk, but they also have a huge chance just because they are already so prevalent and so steeped in technology. And they're also already working on all this stuff, and they've got so much money that they can move pretty quickly.
One last thing. I'm going to spring this on all of you. There's a lot of energy, clearly, from all the people that joined us tonight. If you could recommend one place to turn for more information, a podcast, a book, a thought leader in the space, a video series, an article, like what should people be watching and reading and turning to learn more about all of these amazing innovations?
I mean, obviously, I'm going to plug The Block, which is the leading media firm in the crypto space. Actually, I do find it's really useful just because the URL is theblockcrypto.com, and it's always good to start with news and seeing what's happening. We tend to cover both kind of like what companies are doing, but also what is actually happening on chain, and actually do like a lot of investigative, like data-driven reporting there. That's like public. I focus more on some of the private stuff, but I think like as a general note, the two things that I did to get like super up to speed was Twitter. Like I found people I liked on Twitter, followed them, then they retweeted people that were saying smart things, and then I followed them, and I just growed this network of 500 people. You could also cheat and find someone really smart and then go through their follows and follow all those people. And then, Alexa made this great point about, just being like active and like putting your hand up. The place to do that would be like Discords. So maybe, if you see like a project, from news, or you see a project, just people are talking about it on Twitter, all these things are just being built in the open air. And you can like all these like protocols, usually they distribute most of their public information on Twitter. They'll have a link to their Discord chat. And then you can actually go in and see like people making decisions and talking about things. And you're able to type and join that conversation. And there's like no better way to get up to speed than just to like play around in there.
Cool.
It's a tough space to learn. Like I'm a little bit more of a principled learner. I need like a textbook and kind of just want to like read and understand. And it's hard. There's not a lot that's been written that's like very clear. I would recommend reading the Nakamoto paper. It's fascinating. It's a great 15-page read. Some powerful principles in there. But it's I think George's strategy is the strategy. Just jump into the space and figure it out.
Yeah, I would say it depends on how much time you have, right? Because you can spend hours on Twitter and on Discord. It can be very overwhelming. So it depends on also what type of content you like to consume. So short form, long form. Not Boring by Packy McCormick is a really great newsletter, and he just had a really great rebuttal to Professor Galloway's article on Web3. Professor Galloway, Pivot podcasts are another great resource if you are an Audible or auditory learner. I think, create a wallet. You don't have to do anything. Create a wallet. Coinbase is relatively safer than a lot of the things going on out there. I think just that's something that when I created my actual wallet, it was like a really cool, like hands-on learning experience, getting it funded. There are so many different cryptos. You can actually like play some quizzes on Coinbase when you first join, to actually earn some cryptocurrency so that you have some in your wallet, and it's free. It's just like play to earn. Medium is another really great tool, similar to Mirror, which is it's basically just a more sophisticated resource for blogs, and Mirror is a Web3 native resource for writers and content creators. So it's like you're learning about Web3 on Web3. And then there are, I would say, the other thing is just, talking about it with other people. So finding someone who can actually like teach you, and then find someone who you can teach, because the more you kind of talk about it, and we talked about shameless plugs earlier before you listeners all came on, and I'll plug a piece that I recently wrote about, just how Web3 was like, I graduated from college 10 years ago almost, which is scary, but I hadn't really like learned in depth in such a long time. And with Web3, I just sort of started reading, then I started writing, then I started teaching. And that's the learning pyramid right there. If you really want to like learn something, it's like, you got to be able to teach someone. So I would say just like start, however much time you have, start chipping away at it. And then also like, I'm happy to curate a list. Maybe that's something we can do as a follow-up of just like sending around some of our favorite things, that those sort of, depending on if you're like, you want the top line 5-minute read versus you want to go fully in depth and read that 50-page paper on blockchain and Bitcoin. But there's a lot of different resources out there, no matter what type of learner you are. So.
Cool. Well, I scrambled to write down a lot of those things you shared, and we can send this out as a follow-up to everyone who joined us this evening. Alexa, George, Amit, this was fabulous. We so appreciate your time, learned so much, and thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. This was really, really fun.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
always happy to be a resource to the community. You know, for any of the listeners out there, please, like I love connecting on LinkedIn, on email, anything. So please reach out. I'm always happy to help.
Great.
Same here.
You can catch me.
Welcome,
At, you, can,
everyone.
you can catch me at Carline. So I will. I will. Bye.
All right.
Yeah, I hope you can
Thank
see
you,
the chat. There's
everyone.
just a million thank yous coming in. It feels like the expression, the future is now, has never felt more relevant. My mind is blown, so.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thanks for
everyone.
having
Thanks,
us.
Katie. Thanks, Ed. Thank you, panelists. Have a
Bye.
great night.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Bye-bye.